but I've been getting complaints from parents. And a lot of people wonder, well, why don't these parents approach the school board? Why don't they speak out? Because they're afraid to. And if you do that, many times in society today, if you speak out against an issue involving race or the LGBT issues, you are immediately attacked.
And maybe you're not attacked. Maybe you're just completely shut out. That was State Representative Chuck Basye. He's been here on the show. This is not his first tango with the Columbia Public Schools. He is term limited out. And he made a post last night. How late was this, Hannah? Maybe 8:30?
Yeah, 8:30, almost 9 maybe.
So he posted on Facebook and said, "Today I filed to be a candidate in the April 4th election for Columbia Public Schools Board of Education."
And I immediately went and got some microwave popcorn out of the cabinet because it's going to be good.
Yeah, it was kind of a long post. But he is alleging that the public school authorities, Columbia Public Schools, would not let him in the administration building to complete the filing paperwork. And so he said he was forced to call the Attorney General. He called the Secretary of State and apparently did complete the paperwork at the Boone County Clerk's office. Brian, do we know any more at this point about this?
No, we're going to hear from him coming up at 7:35 this morning. What is it sounds like, well, we don't know. Well, let's just see what he has to say, because there's not a ton of information in there, but it is concerning. Now, I don't know if they don't want him in there. I don't know. I don't want to speculate right now. I mean, obviously he's been at odds with the school district. There's no question about that, but he is still in I think it's very important people realize he is still a state representative right now. He is still, folks, whether people realize it or not, he is the chairman of the Missouri House Elementary and Education Committee, and that won't change until January. And I know he's only got a couple more days, but, even though the House has removed all the outgoing state representatives from the website, and I'm a little confused about that, and they've put the new ones up. The new ones haven't been sworn in. The other ones are still state lawmakers. I mean, if someone has a problem as a constituent, you're not going to call the new people. They're not in office. They can't help you. You got to call people like Rob Vescovo, Martha Stevens, or Chuck Basye, because technically they are still reps. So I'll reach out to Michelle Baumstark. It's a little early right now, but I will once I hear very shortly. There may be a reason, but bottom line, we're going to have him on and we'll hear what he has to say. I mean, this is a big deal to have a chairman of a powerful House committee running if indeed he is certified. He says he will be.
He does.
He's got a farm, and the school district boundaries go outside of Columbia. I think that's, they do. And so he represents, because there's no Roachport school. Understand that. I mean, you've got a couple of churches over there, but the school district goes well outside. And John, just the same thing you and I have dealt with for years. People get confused when Jefferson City schools go all the way up into Callaway County, well into Holt Summit. I think similar here.
So, and there is a history there. And so for those not familiar, he actually called on the superintendent in 2021 to resign, the existing Brian Yearwood. And that was after apparently information came out that this music video by Childish Gambino got played in a classroom. And then Dr. Yearwood came on our program and said, we're not teaching CRT. But there was a contract that was signed regarding 1619 curriculum that was, on the agenda and part of the public record. And after that, he was quoted in the Columbia Daily Tribune as saying, parents and students deserve far better than what they're seeing at Hickman and in the Columbia public school system, which seems to have no interest in ensuring appropriate material is taught in the classroom. Given the fact that Dr. Yearwood is either unaware of the subject matter being taught or is blatantly lying, it is clear he's not fit to carry on as superintendent. And the NAACP got involved, and it was quite a thing for a while. So if he's running and if he's certified, it will be interesting. And I think what we heard yesterday from Mike Murphy at Como Buzz was, as of yesterday morning, there were how many people? 9 people running for 3 open seats. Do we have any idea how many people total have filed for those seats?
Well, the two incumbents are not, and that we're a little unclear on how many are in. Helen Wade and David Seaman are not running. So we don't know an exact amount because we don't know where Basye is right now. So
Right.
it's going to be multiple people. But the fact the two incumbents are not running, Wade has been around for, I mean, she's very well-known attorney here in town. Chuck Basie's been very critical of her, too. Seaman, he ran for mayor. We haven't heard much about him. He's been here at the station a few times. But a young guy, but he won't be running as well. But I definitely am interested to hear from Representative Basye about what exactly happened when he says they wouldn't let him in the Aslan building. Mm-hmm. We need to get more details on that. What exactly that is, and the fact that he had to call the Attorney General, according to him, and the Secretary of State. Stephanie, you're a lawyer. I've been around a long time. John, too. I've never seen anything like this. Again, this is what the representative is saying. I've not seen anything like this.
I haven't either, but so very high drama here in up in North and Boone County. Low drama though in Jefferson City, John. What's the big filing news out of Jefferson City today? Any familiar names in that grouping? Oh.
And that's significant because he's got a clear kind of agenda and blueprint, if you will, would be a better term of what he'd like to see the city do. I agree with John. Edie Vogel's a huge, huge name, and former council person, has run for the legislature before, and John also has been very outspoken on those pavers. That's right. Yes.
And I think, really significant, though, that no one is challenging Ron Fitzwater. If we recall the last mayoral's race, it was like the Eric Greitens. It was one of the first ones where it was like Eric Greitens. It was the, the jungle primary, I think is nationally what it's called. And I don't recall exactly what the percentage of the vote Carrie Turgeon won by, but it wasn't a majority. I think were there 6 candidates, John? I think there were at least 4 major candidates. Yeah.
Are we talking about the first race when she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And she won that handily. But yeah, the Strumpf, that was yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I think when Carrie's first race happened, it was against Bob Scrivener, and there were, I think, 2 others. And Edith Vogel. So she ran Edie Vogel. So Carrie Turgeon looks like she had 41% of the vote. Bob Scrivener, 29. Edie Vogel, 17. Wiesman, 7%. Oh, Leonard Steinman, 3%.
Wiesman, at that time, a former Roy Wiesman, a former council member.
I think any time in recent memory when that office has been not had an incumbent in it, there has been, quite a few candidates interested. So I just think it's fascinating that, Ron Fitzwater is going to get a free pass here to be the next mayor.
He's got a big following. There's no doubt he's the father of the senator to be, Travis Fitzwater. As I recall, John, in that Strumpf-Turgeon race, the first one, I don't think those two got along very well. I definitely think they definitely disagreed on policy, and she beat him pretty handily. I couldn't give you the percentage, but it was probably at least 10 points.
Yeah. So I want to also talk this morning about what is happening at Mizzou. I saw the pictures over the weekend, and I actually sent a text to somebody and said, "Is this for real? I haven't seen this anywhere else." And And I guess it was confirmed yesterday that water. I mean, if you look at water is icicling out of the front. I mean, so I guess frozen pipes. Like, what does that mean for the fall?
Well, we don't know that right now because they're still calculating damage. We do know that there are a number of exactly the in the luxury boxes too in the seats. We do know that there are a number of yellow Service Master of Missouri, Adam Kinzer's vans. I mean, they're all over campus right now and have been. They've been called out. We're talking about a lot of cost. I mean, they're still. I mean, forget the damage. All these yellow trucks. They've got special equipment. They do water restoration. I don't even want to speculate on what that dollar amount will be, but Christian Basye is calculating that. But Marissa Holloway, our news partner, had a big piece on this last night, and it's not just Faroe Field. There are a number of other locations on the campus where there were water pipes that burst. So all that is being calculated right now, and that's why the Service Master yellow trucks have been out there and taking care of it. So we don't know. We do know that the pipe burst, at least one of them, on the 6th floor of Memorial Stadium. And you're right. I mean, looking at those pictures, it looks like almost like icicles coming out of the windows.
Right.
I mean, it's very troubling. And keep in mind, the temperature was well below zero at that time that was happening. We had some light snow falling too.
It really was. Well, we will keep an eye on that and provide updates when we get it. I know a lot of folks around mid-Missouri and around the state have experienced similar things in their homes and businesses. We are having a really exciting show today. I'm excited. We are talking to Representative Chuck Basye at 7:35. We are going to talk to Marc Ellinger on sports betting. It's supposed to be a hot topic in the upcoming legislative session at 6:35. And then at 7:10, we will have Missouri's next Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, in studio. And then Mike Hafner joins us in the 8 o'clock hour. He is a political consultant and is going to talk about political campaigns in today's changing landscape. So very excited for today. Your Daily DC Rundown is coming up next. And that liar, that guy who lies, the story's getting stranger. This is Stephanie Bell in for Branden Rathert, and it's time for the daily DC rundown. Yesterday, we got a decision from the Supreme Court. They are leaving Title 42 in place. They are going to set an expedited hearing in February or March. So there's a lot of pending litigation on Title 42, and they're basically just saying status quo. We're keeping the existing policy, Trump era policy in place, and Biden's administration can't get rid of it until we can hear the case on the merits. Interesting note from that decision yesterday. You don't really get a lot of reasoning, but two folks that you wouldn't maybe normally think would be together filed together in dissent. Justice Gorsuch and Ketanji Brown Jackson both said the court shouldn't be party to a political dispute about immigration policy, particularly now that, the COVID pandemic is essentially, we've declared it over. Still, there were only 4 justices saying that they didn't want to go ahead and stay that. So again, Title 42 remains in place at least for a couple more months, and we will see where the Supreme Court lands on the merits. Also, interesting article yesterday out of The Hill talking about basically Fox News and the Murdoch media empire and how they're turning on Trump in 2022. If you recall, Trump's campaign was completely boosted by the media. It was almost like he was wearing a Fox News body cam. They just followed him around 24/7 and went to every rally, and he was all over Fox News literally all day long. And everyone is noticing, you know what? He's not getting that same type of coverage this year. And so it's starting to lead to frustration, apparently, amongst the Trumpers and Trump himself. But it's a noticeable difference in how media is covering Trump this time around. Interestingly, has anyone heard from Biden lately?
Is he okay?
Apparently
is he taking a nap?
He is taking a very long nap. Apparently, he has nothing on his public schedule this week, like others. Is vacationing. Apparently, he's in St. Croix with his family. So good for him, I guess. Also, this crazy story out of New York with a representative who was just elected, George Santos. He is a Republican, and it came out yesterday that or I guess over the holiday, that he had embellished his resume. And Hannah, you said you could kind of okay.
I feel like everyone has embellished their resume just a little bit, at least once in their life.
His manager of I think people used higher level titles and verbs for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But his was more than that. He said he worked 2 places, which apparently he never worked, and said he had a degree from a college, and then he admitted, well, yeah, I have no degrees.
Those are not very good lies because they can be proven in 3 seconds on the internet.
Yeah, and now that people are kind of aware of it, they're like, I wonder what else this guy has said that's untrue. And he almost seems like, have you ever met one of those people who's just like a serial liar? Like they just can't help themselves?
Yep.
Because it doesn't, the resume thing gets you somewhere, but some of his lies just seem like ridiculous and silly and unnecessary. And so I guess he talked about some charity he was a part of called Friends of Pet United, and apparently that charity doesn't exist. In one interview,
Ouch.
he said his business lost 4 employees in that Pulse nightclub shooting, and somebody looked up the victims and was like, none of them worked for you. And he was like, oh yeah, I lied about that too. Apparently at one point he claimed he had Jewish ancestry, and people have debunked that. Just lie after lie after lie. And now, folks, of course, the Democrats, because the numbers are so close, they're saying he needs to resign. I don't know if he needs to resign, but he really, this seems like a personality disorder or something. Anyway, so more lies coming out. We will keep our eye on that. And then coming up, we are going to have Marc Ellinger talking to us about sports betting. The KC Star recently highlighted 5 big topics in the legislature. We covered initiative petition reform yesterday. We'll be talking about sports betting today. And then in the 7 o'clock hour, we will talk to Andrew Bailey, Missouri's next Attorney General. You're listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri. You are listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri. Branden is out. This is Stephanie Bell, and we are so glad this week to have producer Hannah back.
Hello.
And sounding not sick for the first time in several weeks.
Yay.
And also,
I made it.
Also not in the not sick club, John Marsh. You guys have really struggled. But it is a happy Wednesday morning here on Wake Up Mid-Missouri, and it's a balmy, going to be a high of 54 today, so that's very exciting.
Talk about a heat wave.
Right. I guess all of those icicles on the front of the Mizzou Stadium are just going to melt right off and turn into like a waterfall, right? All right. So we talked yesterday a lot about the upcoming legislative session, what the hot topics are going to be. We covered initiative petition reform, and that one seems to be rising to the top. Although the national news media is trying to say that, it's an evil plot by Republicans to keep them from passing something related to abortion. It's been a hot topic in the state legislature for 5 years. But another hot topic, and I don't know if it's been 5 years or longer than 5 years, but we're going to welcome into the show Marc Ellinger with the soon-to-be-named Ellinger Bell Law Firm. But Marc is a prominent gaming attorney and is going to talk to us about sports betting. How long has that been a hot topic in the legislature?
It's been a hot topic ever since the Supreme Court authorized it by throwing out the PASPA, which was the federal law banning sports betting, which has been 6 years now. 6 years. So it's been 5. You're right on. 5 years it's been introduced.
All right. Well, and we know Senator Caleb Browden has said it's a hot topic, particularly now that Kansas has passed sports betting. A lot of other states have passed sports betting. Why can't Missouri get it done?
Because of the competing interests we have in Missouri. That's the real problem. Both Senator Rowden and Speaker-elect Plocker have said it's a top priority. The leagues want it desperately. The casinos want it desperately. But we have a lot of both black market illegal gambling machines in the state of Missouri, and there are a lot of video machine operators that are outside of the state that would like to be in Missouri. And they're effectively using sports betting as a hostage because they know the only way they can get their products legalized in the state is to go through a process where they hold up the casinos for something the casinos want, in this case sports betting, and cut a deal.
And so all of the issues then become intertwined and we get nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Early on, there were other issues that were involved. The leagues want to get sports integrity fees. They have data. You read it in the newspaper, you see it online everywhere, but they want to get paid for their data. So that's been an issue of controversy. But the real effect is these video game operators, predominantly in Illinois, but in other states, that desperately want in, and they've managed to hamstring it. Senator Denny Hoskins, who's introduced Senate Bill 1, which is the vehicle this time around, and it's interesting, it's Senate Bill 1. It's the first bill introduced in the Senate. Is actually a supporter of the video game operators and not a supporter generically of sports betting. So it's going to be interesting to see how that bill proceeds through the process over in the Senate.
All right. What you mentioned integrity fees. Can you just tell us a little bit, for folks who are not in the gaming space, what's an integrity fee?
So the leagues have data. They have all sorts of data feeds. Use football as an example. They control a lot of the statistics. It's all open source and public, but what the leagues want is they want to get a percentage of the sports book. It's a small percentage, but it's a fee that they charge the operators in return for making sure that the data that's being used is the official league data, and therefore it's not monkeyed with by some outside group. There's no massaging of data, so it's all the same data. It's very controversial. It's been done in a couple of states, and one of the things that occurs is the way the legislation's written, including the Missouri legislation, that integrity fee can be adjusted by the leagues. So they keep saying, well, you want to keep having our information, you have to pay more. You have to pay more, and the margins are not as big as people think. Almost all the states do. I don't know that Arkansas is online yet. They're coming online with sports betting. And Kentucky does not have sports betting. It has horse racing still. But the long and the short of it is the tax rates run all over the gamut across the country. So To use a way of an example, if you go to a casino, the tax rate in a casino is 22% of gross gaming revenue. If you go to the state of New York, they're getting ready to change their sports betting law, but it's 50% is the tax in New York. And that market's unique, and it's struggling because that tax rate's so high. The proposed rates that seem to work are somewhere between 6 and 10%, and I think that's probably where we would end up at. I think the initial proposal is 9% in Senate Bill 1.
So, but if we're not talking about just percentages and we're talking about revenue that the state gets from sports betting, it's a totally different ballgame than traditional gaming revenue, and that's why those percentages are smaller, and it's the way in which the betting works, which you are a CPA, you're a numbers person, and you can explain it. When you explain it to me, I understand, but I have trouble explaining it to anyone else.
The long and the short of it is the tax that actually is collected is the tax on the revenue that the gaming operator, in other words, the sports book, makes on your bet. It's not the amount that you bet, because you're not actually betting against the sports book, you're betting against other people that are betting. So, if you put $20 on Mizzou to win tonight against Kentucky, somebody else is betting $20 on Kentucky to win, and you're actually betting against each other. The book is taking a fee, and it's built into the odds, and the way the odds are structured, they're taking a fee. That's the revenue. That's the amount that the tax is ultimately composed of. And the dirty secret in gaming is it's an amenity. Everybody wants sports betting. The leagues want it. The teams want it. The casinos want it. Everybody wants sports betting. There's just not that much money to be made off of it because the actual tax receipts are very small because the amount of money that's made off of the bet, that little bit that's the fee that they get for making the bet work, is not a large sum of money.
And so, but ultimately you would think, if Kansas has sports betting and Missouri doesn't, then, we're driving people over to Kansas. So even though, the state, isn't maybe taking home that much on the bet, you're hoping that having the amenity of sports betting drives people into your hotels and your restaurants and your other casinos, and maybe they're doing additional betting while they're there.
Absolutely. It from a casino perspective, it drives people onto the floor. It makes them want to show up to gamble other things when maybe the game's not the one they want to watch, but the next game is. The TV, the leagues love it because it drives eyeballs on TVs. People watch games in which they're betting. They particularly watch games in which they do what they call prop bets, is where you're betting on in-game activities. Who's going to get the first touchdown? How many yards is somebody going to go for? That's stuff that people really, really watch the TV and want to watch it. It makes people come to baseball games or football games and sit in the stadium because they can bet as they watch the game. It adds a lot of amenities. The revenue itself is not big, but the external revenue is huge. And then there's the whole discussion about, did the Chiefs move to Kansas? There's a big push. Arrowhead Stadium's reaching the end of its life expectancy. Will they build a new stadium in Missouri, or will they build a stadium where there's sports betting in Kansas?
So I know as a gaming law attorney, you're not really a betting guy, but are you going to give us an over and under on whether or not the state legislature gets anything done on sports betting this year?
I would say that let's call it a coin flip at best that something gets passed.
All right, I think. All right, well, coming up, we are going. So the only person I think I know that flies, that I know in my circle more than me, is Marc. And you've done some work with airports in the past. Southwest has completely melted down. And I read some articles yesterday about why they are melting down. And Hannah and I are both flabbergasted at the actual reason. So I want to dig into that, see if you can provide any answers, and see if I'm going to be nervous to fly in the future based on the complete lack of any capable people at the top in these airlines. All right, that's coming up next. And then, of course, right at 7:10, we will have Andrew Bailey, Missouri's next Attorney General. You're listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
The tools we use to recover from disruption serve us well 99% of the time, but clearly we need to double down on our already existing plans to upgrade systems for these extreme circumstances so that we never again face what's happening right now.
I am just completely flabbergasted at what is happening with Southwest. I don't understand. It's been, 4 days now since we've had weather, and they are still completely melting down. My name is Stephanie Bell. I am sitting in for Branden Rathert here this morning on Wake Up Mid-Missouri. I am joined by Marc Ellinger, a local attorney, and my law partner, who I think is the person that I know that flies the most. And so, this thing happened and you're like, oh yeah, bad weather, holidays, increased travel. And I'm thinking, okay, understandable. But, we're on, again, day 4 or 5 of this. They still can't figure it out. And yesterday I read this article that says, well, yeah, we're trying to get the employees, the crew members to call in because we're not even sure where everybody is. And that's why we can't get them, because we have planes, but then we don't have the crew members in the right locations to get them all matched up and so basically we just have to do a complete reset. And there have been, alleged stories of crew members saying, yeah, I'm trying to call and say where I'm at so I can help, but, the computers are just at a complete breakdown. So what exactly is happening here?
This is Southwest's problem. This is the second time that's happened to Southwest in the last couple of years. People may not recall this exact same issue happened a few years ago. It was based out of Florida. There was bad weather in Florida that shut a bunch of stuff down, and on the East Coast. And they had to cut thousands of flights. Other airlines had that same problem that time. The other airlines have seemed to figure it out. Southwest, one of their issues is they run a very efficient operation, almost too efficient. It's all down to very few minutes in turning airplanes around. That saves them a lot of money. It makes them put a lot more flights into the air. But when there's a hiccup, either with a plane or multiple planes or with crews, it's tears through their system very quickly and causes a lot of problems.
Just like dominoes. And so yesterday we were recounting some Christmas fails. And so Southwest, has lots of resources, huge company, lots of responsibility. And one of Hannah's Christmas fails was
my fiance was snooping on Life 360, saw where my car was parked while I was out Christmas shopping, and totally guessed his Christmas present.
Right? So we can snoop on each other and figure out where our people are and where they might be shopping. We know their location. We can shoot people into the moon for fun, just for travel, right? We can go into outer space just if you have enough money. I feel like the Facebook algorithm knows what I ate for breakfast, what my latest purchases were. I feel like the people who are responsible for propelling us through the sky in giant hunks of metal should know where their employees are. And presumably all of these employees have a phone where they could just turn on their Life 360 or their location services, and the company should have a real-time idea of where people are. I guess, how did we let this go on so long, and how is it so bad? I don't understand.
This is a uniquely Southwest Airlines issue. American and Delta and United, the other 3 big carriers, don't seem to have the same problem. Whether that's because they have better internal data systems, it's really kind of hard to know. But Southwest, as I said earlier, they try to be super efficient, and I'm going to speculate, obviously, but the speculation is that they focus so much on efficiencies and turning airplanes around that they haven't focused on the people management tracking system. And we're in a new environment now. Southwest, amongst all the other airlines, lost tens of thousands of employees during COVID. They laid them off. Many of them never came back. There's a backlog on flight attendants. There's a backlog on pilots. It takes a long time to train them up. So whereas pre-COVID, something like this might have occurred and they could have called 1,000 reserve crew to come in Dallas, they don't have the 1,000 reserve crew anymore. They've got everybody going out all the time. The flight attendant schools are packed. But it takes 18 months to go through a flight attendant school. So it's a real problem. It's part of the legacy of the insanity of shutting everything down during COVID. Well, I'll start with the first question because it's actually easier than the second question, John. Southwest uses a hub system. It's not the same as the system that American, Delta, and United use, which is, really big hubs where you bring all the planes in, you take all the planes out. They do use hubs. That's one of the reasons why you can fly direct from St. Louis or Kansas City to some places, but other places maybe you have to go to Denver and then to Las Vegas, or you might have to go from St. Louis to Chicago to Detroit, etc. That's because they use a few airports as major connection centers. Denver's one of them. Chicago Midway is another. Dallas Love Field's another. Those are just some examples of ones they use as major connection centers. When one or more of those goes down for Delta, it creates a problem. Much the same way I use American. That's what I fly on. If Dallas goes down because of storms, it has a big effect on the American Airlines system all the way around. As far as legal recourse, you don't have a lot. You technically do not have a seat or a ticket on an airplane. You have a reservation to fly on an airplane that they can cancel under their terms of carriage, which by and large provide that the worst thing in the worst situation entirely, they refund your ticket price, which is kind of what they do anyway if you don't fly.
I think last time Branden had an issue, he ended up talking to the BBB and actually did end up with like a voucher or something, but it took a while. So maybe for those of you who had to take a really long and unexpected road trip or missed your vacations or holiday travel, it might be a while before, or might be forever before you ever see any recourse from them.
It's hard to get recourse. The vouchers that you get when you travel, it's interesting because if it's a weather-related problem, you get no voucher. But if it's a airport or airplane-related problem, you get a voucher. So if your plane has a flat tire and as a result you can't fly, they might give you a restaurant or hotel voucher. If it snows in Denver and 4 days later you don't have an airplane, that's a weather-related delay, and they're not obligated to compensate you at all.
Wow. I wish we could all operate like airlines, right? All right. Well, coming up next, we are going to talk to Missouri's next Attorney General, Andrew Bailey. And Mark, I'm going to ask you to stick around. You've been knowing Andrew for a while. He does some work with the Federalist Society, has served on that board with you and I. You have some history in dealing with the Attorney General's office for a number of years. So excited to talk to Andrew. He's made some staffing additions here, I think, since the last interview I've heard from him. So we'll ask him about that and more coming up at 7:10. You're listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri. I was going to name Not Branden Rathert, but Stephanie Bell in for Branden. He is
thank
taking
goodness.
a much needed break, and I am actually wearing shoes, not flip flops. So it is an upgrade. It's also an upgrade that is going to be a high of 54 today, and so we are all very happy about that on this Wednesday morning. We are also very happy to still be joined by Marc Ellinger, local attorney and my law partner, but we are extremely pleased to be joined by Missouri's next Attorney General, Andrew Bailey.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Stephanie and Mark, and just want to say hello and good morning to everybody out there in mid-Missouri.
And we are also joined by John Marsh and Brian Houseworth and producer Hannah. So this is your first radio interview on a Zimmer news station, I believe. You had a press conference on the day of the announcement. You are in the midst of a transition. We have had Attorney General Schmidt on the show. He has commented briefly on the transition. So how's it going so far?
So far, so good. You know, the General Schmidt's team has been really helpful. Couldn't be more thankful for that. There's just a lot of good people that work in that office that want to see the transition go smoothly and want to see continuity in operations and that legacy of excellence continue. And certainly I'm dedicated to that as well. So all good.
Now, you have also made, since the last appearance that I've seen you in the media, you've made some big hires. One, Ray Wagner, and the other hire I saw was Josh Devine. So for people in Boone County, it's not Judge Josh Devine. There are actually two right-of-center lawyers, roughly in the same age bracket, in the same generation. So a different Josh Devine, who used to be with Senator Hawley's office. So can you talk about those hires and, potential hires maybe coming up?
Absolutely. Yeah, excited to be putting that senior team together as part of the transition there for the Attorney General's office. And yeah, I'm friends with Judge Josh Devine here in Columbia. And so know and respect Judge Josh Devine. I think he is excited to still be on the bench. So we hired Josh Devine from Senator Hawley's office. And so Josh Devine, that worked for Senator Hawley as his general counsel or chief counsel, he's a certified FedSoc presenter. He has been plugged in to the legal community for a long time now. Clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas on the United States Supreme Court. So he is well known in legal circles around the country. And he's going to be our next Solicitor General, which is fantastic. He brings that level of appellate law acumen to the table. We also John Sauer, who has served as Solicitor General for the state of Missouri for the last 6 years, has agreed to stay on. He has dedicated himself to staying in the good fight there at the Attorney General's office. Is going to transition into Deputy Attorney General for Special Litigation. So we're going to have two of the most brilliant appellate minds in the state there at the Attorney General's office, all rowing in the same direction, keeping the pressure on Biden's federal government to prevent that federal administrative overreach. We're excited about that. Ray Wagner comes on board and brings years of experience from the Ashcroft administration working in state government, Director of Revenue, General Counsel to the Governor. He's been at Enterprise Holding Company for the past several years, but is well known in legal, judicial, business circles throughout the state and nation as well. He is bringing a level of maturity and managerial excellence to the table as well. So really excited to have both those guys on board. We're going to have two more big staffing announcements coming out, maybe today and tomorrow. Still kind of finalizing some details on those, but excited to be announcing those as well. And I think they'll be headline makers as well.
Andrew, we appreciate you joining us in studio, and it's great to get to see you. I know I've seen you over at the governor's office and at the Capitol. So really two questions kind of unrelated. Do you have a date right now where you think you're going to be sworn in? Because technically Eric Schmidt is still the Attorney General, or is that being worked on? And I do want to get your take as well. I know you can't talk specifics, but the Geiger gas, we have gotten a lot of calls. People are frustrated that have prepaid for the propane. And your thoughts on that investigation when you take over the AG's office. I assume the Attorney General's investigation launched by Eric will continue. If you could talk about that, because that's still a big deal.
Yeah, certainly. So the plan right now is that Senator-elect Eric Schmidt will swear into the United States Senate at noon Eastern time in Washington, D.C. So about 11 o'clock our time, there will be a swearing-in ceremony at the Missouri Supreme Court, and I'll swear in as the 44th Attorney General for the state of Missouri.
Was that today?
January 3rd.
January 3rd. Okay,
3rd.
Forgive me. Yes.
Yep, January 3rd.
Okay.
So that's the big day for the official transition. There's a lot going on that day in the state of Missouri as well, so we'll be on duty working day one. As far as the gas issue, and I know we've at the governor's office, we've certainly been dealing with that as well. So it's an issue I'm familiar with. Certainly, consumer protection is one of the major tasks assigned to the Attorney General's office in statute. It's something I take very seriously, and where there's violations of the Missouri Merchandising Practices Act, there's violations of the Consumer Protection Code, the Attorney General's office is going to pursue those.
Very good. Thank you.
We are glad to be joined in studio by Missouri's next Attorney General, Andrew Bailey.
Yeah, certainly. Well, there's a lot of work to be done there, and the amendment actually assigns the task to the judiciary to begin the process. So at the governor's office, we've met with the judiciary and started talking through budget concerns and what it's going to take to accomplish the mandate for the expungements there in Amendment 3. So it's the process is already underway as far as getting the pieces lined up to be able to execute that mission. The Attorney General's office is tasked with providing legal support throughout the process, and we stand ready to do that. I mean, there's a lot of text in that amendment. There are some complexities there that need to get worked out, and certainly we stand ready to assist both the state agencies, the judiciary, or any other entity that we're assigned to assist with that to make sure there's legal clarity there.
Andrew, the Attorney General's office is either the largest law firm in the state of Missouri or close to the largest law firm in the state of Missouri. It used to be the largest. You've got hundreds of attorneys all over the state. I guess since we've had two attorney generals who have moved on to higher office, you're kind of coming in a different role, kind of the attorney's attorney coming in. How do you see the philosophy of the office? What are going to be the priorities that you want to focus on, and what is the philosophy that as Attorney General you're going to try to espouse for the Attorney General's office in Missouri?
Well, I think longevity is important at this point. And, it is fantastic that we've had such great attorneys general that the people have rewarded them with higher office. But I want to provide some longevity to that office. And I specifically want to focus on protecting the Constitution, enforcing the laws as written, defending the state, supporting the counties, and training up a new generation of public service-minded attorneys. We can populate all of state government with good, conservative thinking attorneys that are in the public sector, and we can use the Attorney General's office as a way to breed that new generation. Every case we're going to file, every case we're going to defend will be evaluated under that framework that I've laid out.
All right, we are talking to Andrew Bailey, Missouri's next Attorney General. Marc and I have known you here for a while, working on some boards and other things, and I got out ahead in front of myself. And maybe for our listeners who aren't as familiar with you or your background, can you tell the listeners, what's your story?
Yeah, happy to do it. At the end of the day, I'm a combat veteran. I'm a father of 4. I'm a prosecutor. And I'm a conservative constitutionalist, and that's the foundation of who I am. That's the bedrock of what drives me. I grew up here in mid-Missouri and attended school here in mid-Missouri, then went to the University of Missouri on an ROTC scholarship in 1999, before there was a war on terror. I always wanted to go to law school, but when terrorists attacked our nation, my career plans changed, and I wanted to get in the fight. So I volunteered for a combat arms branch of service in the Army, volunteered to go to Iraq, ended up completing 2 deployments to Iraq. The second one was 15 months long, so 455 days. So spent a lot of time overseas, and had the privilege of leading soldiers in combat. And that taught me certain leadership lessons and managerial skills that I think are going to be useful leading one of the largest law firms in the state of Missouri. After I got out of the Army, I lived in the city of St. Louis briefly and worked as an armed guard at a courthouse while I was applying to law school, and came back to mid-Missouri at Mizzou on a post-9/11 GI Bill. So I attended Mizzou Law, and I focused my studies on constitutional law and criminal prosecution. And I knew I wanted to go into the public sector. So ended up at the Attorney General's office as a line attorney, defending the state's criminal justice system in federal court from civil suit, also doing special prosecution around the state. And got to see a lot of different courthouses, interact with a lot of different law enforcement agencies in a lot of different communities. Really enjoyed that time. Wanted to plug into a community, and ended up accepting a position as an assistant prosecuting attorney in Warren County. And so moved out to East Central Missouri and lived in Warren County, worked in Warrenton as an assistant prosecutor, and got to try numerous felony jury trials. Really had a good time working with law enforcement agencies there, interacting with the community through that process. And it was also in that capacity that I worked as the attorney for the Warren County Juvenile Office. And I remember sitting in court and having kids in court telling the judge that they wanted the judge to terminate their parents' parental rights because they wanted a home to go to. They wanted permanence. And it really touched my heart. So my wife and I became foster parents. We've ended up adopting 3 kids out of the system. We've also had a biological child. So we're blessed with 4 kids. And went back to state employment, worked at Department of Corrections briefly, and then was called up to the governor's office and have been there ever since.
That's an amazing story, and I know somebody who's familiar with the listeners, Jennifer Bukowski, who, we never had the opportunity to practice against each other. Mark and I don't do criminal law, but Jennifer said, she had an opportunity to kind of face off on some trials, and I know she speaks very highly of you.
I tell you, Jennifer made me a better attorney because she is good at what she does. She's a student of the law. She's a great practitioner of the law. And so getting to practice in a courtroom with her, against her, just being able to observe her, it's a good mentorship opportunity for young attorneys.
Well, and I know it really is. And I'm excited about everything you've talked about with the Attorney General's office. Mark and I have the opportunity to frequently interact. A lot of times we'll ask folks, hey, where can we go to learn more? And I know right now it appears you're focused on the transition. There's no website or candidate committee yet. Is that the case?
That is the case. It is forthcoming. It will happen next week, so we're going to get some stuff online. We're going to get a social media presence. After the official transition, there, of course, we will have an official website, Facebook page, Twitter account. So we'll be pushing content out through both mediums, and excited to do that. A lot on the plate right now with the transition, so it is a priority, and we're getting to it.
Well, we will be looking forward to welcoming you back to Wake Up Mid-Missouri when all of that kicks off.
I can't wait.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. Coming up, we are going to do What's Hot with Hannah.
I know how much you love to make fun of Gen Z. You're going to have a heyday with this one.
All right. It's 7:25-ish, which means it's...
It's actually 7:25.
Look at me go.
I never
winning.
really know how to react when we actually hit it, because it's just one of those things that's not supposed to happen, I guess. So, Stephanie, you're going to have a heyday with this one, because I know how much you love to make fun of Gen Z.
I do. I don't know that I make fun of them, just that I don't understand anything that they do. I don't
It's
understand
just because
their clothes.
you're too old.
I am old.
So this article is not a good look for Gen Z or millennials. So
Uh-oh.
I'm
That's
kind of
me.
going to lump you in there with me and bring us both down. But there is an article from Insider, and it's highlighting a lady named Mary Copps, and she has built an entire business based off of training Gen Z and millennials how
I
to
saw
talk
this.
on the phone.
You
And she
know?
charges $480 for 1 hour of her coaching.
Coaching just to learn how to talk on the phone.
Right. She's
Ouch.
basically saying, and I kind of agree with this, I can relate to it a little bit. You know, we've grown up with texting, and it's, impersonal, it's real easy and fast. So in a, business or professional setting, it's a little more anxiety inducing to pick up the phone and have to call someone. So she's trying to coach people to overcome that phone phobia, is what she calls it. And she's apparently doing so by charging almost $500 for her services.
What Gen Z or millennial has $500 to spend on phone coaching services? Isn't that a
Right.
skill that you all could have just learned on YouTube? Like, isn't there a YouTube video how to talk on the phone?
Probably, but you can't blame a girl for cashing in.
I will say when I started my professional career, even when I first started in a law office, I did not love picking up the phone. And I am older than you, so I think I've talked on the phone more, but I would much rather, we've talked about how I think leaving a voicemail is rude when you can just send a text. Mark is laughing because Mark is older than me.
My kids are Gen Z.
He's playing the role of Branden today, so he is all about talking on the phone. Also, as lawyers, there are times where we advise people to talk on the phone, right? So there are certain times where you should talk on the phone, but there are certain times where it's just annoying and it just wastes everyone's time.
It's easy to have a conversation on a phone and have, just like you're talking to somebody back and forth. Think about how you would have a conversation sitting next to each other versus a text message where you just say bye. End of conversation.
You've coached me on that before. He's like, you don't say bye to people, you just hang up the phone. And I said, well, that's because I'm done talking to them. And they're going to know that I meant bye when they get the click sound, right? Like, I don't understand. Now, do you think there are lawyers out there who are thinking, you know what, my legal rate is $200 an hour and this lady's charging $400 an hour for phone coaching? That's so silly, but I love it. If phone calls were a thing in the past, I don't know that I would be that sad.
Yeah, I suffer from social anxiety from time to time, and I, like I said, do get very nervous if I have to call someone on the phone. So I probably wouldn't spend $500 to overcome that phobia.
I'll charge you $300.
Oh, what a steal. Wow. Is that the friends and family discount?
That is.
Thanks.
That is. All right. Well, I will be putting on, a program next week for younger Gen Z Zimmer employees for how to talk on the phone. Also, putting on a program for how to file for office if the people don't like you is going to be Representative Chuck Basye. He has tangoed with the Columbia Public Schools a few times over the last several years, and in fact at one point called on the superintendent to resign. He attempted to file for Columbia Public School Board yesterday and ran into allegedly some issues. He will join us at 7:35 and detail his, I think as he put it, Hannah, his very interesting day yesterday.
Yeah, he told me last night. He said, today's been an interesting day.
Coming up next on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
but I've been getting complaints from parents, and people wonder, well, why don't these parents approach the school board? Why don't they speak out? Because they're afraid to. And if you do that, many times in society today, if you speak out against an issue involving race or the LGBT issues, you are immediately attacked.
And maybe you're attacked, or maybe you're just shut completely out. This is Stephanie Bell sitting in for Branden Rathert on Wake Up Mid-Missouri, and we are joined by State Representative Chuck Basye, who currently serves as the chairman of the House Elementary and Secondary Education Committee, and I think, according to his own words, had a rather interesting day yesterday when attempting to file for Columbia Public School Board. Representative Basye, can you detail your day for us?
Well, yeah. Well, good morning, and thanks for having me as always. I really appreciate you all, what you do. But yeah, I decided over the weekend. Actually, it was Christmas Eve, discussing with family. I've been kicking around this idea for a while about getting in the school board race, and I read the article that the Missourian put out on December 22nd. So Christmas Eve, we were kicking around some things, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and file. So I talked to my dad. He's 95, but still doing very, very well for his age. And he was on me all day Christmas and said, you got to do it. So I sent an email to the board secretary at Noel McDonald and said I intend to be at the board office Tuesday. Not those exact words, but so anyway, then I found out that the school district had issued one of their policies said you had to let them know by December 22nd at the close of business if you wanted to file or not, which is in violation of state law, according to the Secretary of State's office and some other attorneys I spoke to. So anyway, I got an email late Monday night from Dr. Yearwood and said, Chuck, we're open all day Tuesday, come on in. So anyway, mid-morning Tuesday, I was planning on getting there about 11 o'clock. He called me, Dr. Yearwood called me and said, I made a mistake. And kudos to him. He owned up to a mistake. We all make them. I make quite a few mistakes. But anyway, he said that he overlooked that policy, and he said, we cannot let you file. So that set the wheels in motion. I contacted some people I know. Secretary Ashcroft was nice enough to personally help me a little bit. And about mid-afternoon, I was actually heading out to my deer stand. He called me. Jay Ashcroft called me and said, Chuck, you need to go to the county clerk's office and file. So I did. It was a little, and not kudos to them, Stephanie. They were just wonderful down there. Art Hour is the deputy clerk. I think the guy went well out of his way to help me out. And so anyway, I think I'm legally filed based on what I've been told, and now it's up to the school district whether or not they want to accept that. So we'll see what happens, but if they choose to go in that direction where they're not going to let me get on the ballot, they can expect some legal action. This is not a paid position. I'm not wealthy, but I am going to expend resources and challenge them in court if that's what it comes down to.
Chuck Basye again is our guest here. He is live. He is still chairman of the Missouri's House Elementary and Secondary Education Committee until early January. He's an outgoing state lawmaker joining us live. Two quick points, Representative. I want to make sure I'm hearing you right. If you are not allowed, if the district says you're not a candidate and they won't let you on the ballot, you are telling our listeners that you will sue in Boone County Circuit Court. Did I hear that correctly, sir?
I'm not sure if that's the avenue, but I will get the appropriate legal advice, and I intend to take this to the level to get some satisfaction done.
Okay.
I believe I'm legally filed. They have no right to set a deadline like that. I met their deadline. I showed up. I tried to get into the board office and rang the buzzer. And I tapped on the door. I called the phone number. I left a message, and they didn't have the courtesy to call me back. So be it, and I'm not blaming anybody in particular. I'm sure that that lady that they had there at the time, Mrs. McDonald, was instructed to take that action. But this is inappropriate. I think that if the filing period is open on the December 22nd, 27th, close of business. I was there at 11 o'clock in the morning. I think I should have been able to file. And that goes for anybody else that wanted to file for that position as well.
And if I could follow up, I did reach out to Michelle Baumstark this morning, and she did respond right before our 7:30 newscast here. And this is what she writes, Mr. Chairman. She writes, December the 27th is a district holiday. The offices were closed. Office holiday hours and filing information is posted on the doors, advertised and posted publicly on our website. Filing was available by appointment, and appointments were to be made by December the 22nd. Here are the publicly posted filing procedures, and I clicked on it. It is a page. So, and again,
Right.
I'm not sure exactly where that is on the website, but she is basically saying that you needed to make an appointment by December the 22nd. Representative, your response to what they're saying?
Well, I understand that she's supporting the district's decision. I disagree with that 100%. I think she's incorrect. I don't think any candidate should need to get an appointment with particularly this entity, the Columbia Public Schools, to file. When the filing period is open until the 27th, I understand the appointment, but I went through the motions. When I decided to run, it was past their arbitrary deadline of the 22nd. I disagree with that statement, and we'll see what happens. So that kind of tells me they're going to say that I'm not qualified to be on the ballot. So I'll wait and see if I get something formal from them. Dr. Yearwood did say yesterday on the phone with me that he would send me written clarification of what he felt was their policy. And I replied to him in an email. I never got it. I asked him to, cite some references, their particular policies, state statutes that are following, and things of that nature. So I think they're wrong. I think they're in violation of state law. And this is nothing new. There's Columbia Public Schools has repeatedly violated people's rights and before, and there's just no repercussions. They don't care what the laws are. They're just not afraid of any penalties because, frankly, no one is able to hold them accountable. So that's kind of one of the main reasons I want to get on the board. I want to push for some accountability. I want to support the teachers that have lost their voice or are afraid to speak out to some of the things that's being pushed down on their children, and many, many other things. I could go on and on for several hours about all the problems that I see with the Columbia Public Schools. Well, I hope they don't feel that way. I want to work with them. I don't want to work against them. But, yeah, 2 years in a row, I had legislation that was hopefully going to prohibit mainly biological men playing on women's sports teams and high school sports. I think that's inappropriate. I think the majority of citizens think that I'm correct on that. And it's just wrong. And this is, believe me, this is not an attack on the gay and lesbian population at all. I got many emails from people that said that they were gays or whatever, and they agreed with me. This is a problem with the transgender movement. I think that they have hijacked the gay and lesbian movement that has gone on for years. And I'm pretty confident that something's going to be done this year. I've talked to both senators and state reps that they intend to get this through to the governor this year, and I think they're going to do it.
I don't know. I think, Columbia Public Schools' worst nightmare sounds like a good campaign slogan, right? I don't know if somebody could get elected on that platform or not, or whether Columbia or Boone County could elect anybody of a conservative lean at this point. But
yeah, and I know it's a tall order. It's going to be a tough way to go, but that was part of my decision. I saw there were 7 people in a race. There's 3 openings. And I thought David Seaman was going to file again, but he did not. But so there's 1 incumbent running. So all somebody's got to do is come in third, and I'm really pulling for John Potter. I think I don't know a lot of these candidates, but I know April Ferraro a little bit through Facebook communication. I think she's a good person. John Potter's a stand-up guy. I'm really rooting for him, and if I can get on there, of course, I'll be pushing myself as well.
Well, I think this is an interesting issue, and we'll be watching to see the updates. And I'm sure Brian will let us know if the Columbia school board says that you're filed or not. I will note, Mark, how many times have you been to the Secretary of State's office on a Sunday to turn in a ballot measure? Because that's a statutory deadline, right? And they haul all of their staff members in on a Sunday to count the petition boxes. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct.
Hold on.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, it is a statutory deadline that has to be open. The clerk's office has to be open. I mean, on the final filing date for state and local offices, the school board is obligated to be open on the 27th. I think, frankly, a case in circuit court would be, in my opinion, a slam dunk, and he'd win immediately. And my guess is that the school district will say he can be on the ballot because they don't want the loss in a courtroom on top of it.
So you think, Mark, Counselor, you think, because Representative was mentioning he wasn't sure of the jurisdiction. It's clearly Boone County Circuit Court. That would be the court of jurisdiction. You believe that if the district tells him you're not a candidate because the district office was closed, you didn't have an appointment by the 22nd, you believe Kevin Crane, Jeff Harris, Josh Devine, Brooke Jacobs, one of those four, I assume, would get the case. You believe that they would rule in favor of Basye?
Assuming all the paperwork was filled out, he signed the affidavit that's required of candidacy, which I presume is what the circuit or the county clerk's office did. He is a qualified candidate, and I think the school board would have. I think they would be in a really bad place if they denied that.
Interesting.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Representative Basye. We will keep a close eye on the progress. And, of course, if you end up in a school board campaign, we would be delighted to have you back on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great new year. Best to your mother, Brian. I hope everything's going all right in that avenue. So
Godspeed, and thank you for your kind words. You know that dementia is a terrible thing, but she's hanging in there, and we appreciate your prayers, Representative. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Coming up next, we will revisit the Supreme Court's recent decision on Title 42, its decision yesterday, and the two people that ended up in the dissent that I would not have expected. That's next on Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
And that's a good thing. Look, if it weren't for Title 42, we'd have a full-blown catastrophe at the southern border right now.
That's Representative Buddy Carter out of Georgia. Of course, since March of 2020, Title 42 has allowed border agents to turn folks away because of COVID-19. Yesterday, big decision coming down from the Supreme Court, not on the merits, but just on the stay. There was initially an emergency stay that kept in place Title 42, which is a Trump-era policy. And yesterday was kind of the regular stay, the extension of the stay. So Title 42 remains in place, but they are going to set an expedited argument, which means the case would be heard in February or March, and the decision would be, we don't know when, right, Mark?
It'll be before the end of July, because that's when they issue all their opinions.
And so, but it could be the very last day of July.
Very much so.
All right. So Title 42 persists for a little while longer. Some interesting folks together in the dissent, and typically when these stay orders are issued, you don't find out any details. It's just pretty short. But here there was actually a written dissent by two folks that I wouldn't have necessarily thought would have signed on to the same opinion.
No, it's a 2-page dissent. It's written by Justice Gorsuch, who's a Republican appointee and has been a deciding vote in some cases, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, the newest judge on the Supreme Court. And I think it's a fascinating dissent. It's 2 pages long. It's actually something that somebody could read and get a kick out of. But it calls in the hypocrisy of this whole issue. I found the most interesting part where the dissent says the current border crisis is not a COVID crisis, and courts should not be in the business of perpetuating administrative edicts designed for one emergency only because elected officials have failed to address a different emergency, COVID and the border being two separate issues. Everybody concedes the border is a problem. Even the administration in the brief and the opinion says that, but it's not a COVID problem.
But also throwing some shade at elected officials pretty straight on. And then, Hannah's over there still holding out hope. She's getting married next year. She has some student debt. She's hoping for that extra little bump thanks to Biden. And as a conservative, somebody who paid my student loans back, I'm like, if Biden says the COVID crisis is over, then he doesn't have the authority to say that he gets to do loan relief on the basis of some emergency that no longer exists. But then you find conservatives out there saying, yes, Title 42, but then are we not talking out of both sides of our mouth? Because if it's an emergency, then you get student loan debt relief and you get Title 42. If it's not an emergency, then you lose the debt relief, but you also lose Title 42. But we kind of want to have it both ways.
That's classic hypocrisy. We don't like the policy, therefore it needs to be unconstitutional. We like the policy. It needs to stay. I mean, it's not, there's not any doubt there. I do think what's interesting about that, however, is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was a very active questioner on a number of cases, assuming that she is consistent with the philosophy, that's a liberal vote to get rid of student loan forgiveness, which I think is very interesting because the assumption is that it would get thrown out. If it gets thrown out, it'll be thrown out purely by the conservative members of the court. Seeing a bipartisan, so to speak, decision would make things very fascinating.
So we're rolling in all sorts of predictions. This is a week of predictions for next year, and there was a strong one from you coming in on how she might come down on student loan debt relief. I'm still hoping for a full prediction show on whether Elon Musk is the hero or the villain of 2023, whether Twitter survives 2023. I think there are some issues that the folks here in the Wake Up family would definitely have different opinions on going forward. I also I want to preview our next guest. We're going at 8:10. We're going to be joined by Mike Hafner. And Mark, you know his bio better than I do, but he's been in Missouri campaigns for a dozen or more years.
He's been doing campaigns across the state for a number of years, has worked on statewide campaigns, congressional campaigns, regional campaigns. Guy's really been in the back room and in the front room, I guess, of almost every major race in the state of Missouri one way or another.
And it's setting up to be a really interesting 2024. And the midterms, I feel like I didn't have a good read on. I thought I knew where they were going, and they turned out to be very disappointing for me. And so I want to get his read on that and how maybe he sees 2024 differing from the past campaigns that he's been involved in.
And I think the question of where polling comes down in the future is going to be fascinating to see, too, because everybody missed on the polling.
All right, that's up next on Wake Up Mid-Missouri. Not Branden Rathert, but Stephanie Bell sitting in today for Branden Rathert. I am still joined by attorney Marc Ellinger of the soon-to-be-named Ellinger Bell. And we are also very excited to be joined by Mike Hafner. Now, we were recounting your background a little bit for folks who, aren't as familiar with your full resume. A lot of politicos, they don't put your, like where lawyers, if you get on my website, I have this very long bio, and politicos kind of like to be a little bit more like under the radar, I feel like. So I was asking you what your first campaign was off air, and it kind of surprised me. So recount for us your campaign history.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I got started as an 18-year-old. It was a volunteer position for Matt Blunt's campaign in 2004. Obviously, that one was successful, and then I went on to Senator Jim Tallent's race. I was still in college at the time and had a great opportunity to work on a top-tier U.S. Senate race, one of the top two in the country that cycle. And to this day, some of my best friends in politics are still from that campaign. And that hobby in college ended up becoming a career and had some additional opportunities along the way. And I'm still in the game and now preparing for a crazy 2024 cycle.
And so I guess, do you have a favorite campaign? Is there a favorite? I mean, that talent campaign really did produce, the folks from that staff really are, leading a lot of different areas of politics and government these days.
I don't want to ever compare campaigns to warfare in any way, but the relationships that you forge in each of them, I think, are very unique. It's like any profession where you suffer together, and sometimes you end up victorious, and sometimes you can run a campaign and fall and come up short. In terms of a favorite campaign, I think you meet people in each one that you take along with you, in the journey of life, and to that end, it'd be hard to. I've worked for some great candidates, some ones that truly were in it for the right reasons, and I'm proud of each of the candidates, even the ones that lost, that I've worked for, because I think they were doing it for the right reasons and wanted to serve this state and country in a meaningful way. But yeah, I don't think a favorite one to answer your question.
But now you have your own consulting business that does political consulting, communications consulting, Spartan Strategic, and you kind of freelance on various campaigns and have sometimes committed yourself to the full campaign. I think Marc had an interesting question leading up to this about polling, and Marc and I actually spent some time talking, and you got to introduce Trafalgar at an RNLA conference, and I thought that guy had it right on. I was fully bought in for where we were going to be on the midterms, and I was very disappointed, like many others. But that was all on a national scale. You tend to focus more on Missouri. So Marc?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it from this perspective. When you started in politics, polls were pretty darn accurate. Everybody had landlines. They were able to get good data. Tracking polls were particularly accurate. It seems like in the last couple of years, particularly since 2016 forward, the polls and the tracking polls have been all over the place, and in this last time around, just horribly inaccurate. As somebody who's in politics, what's the effect of that change, and is that going to continue, or is there a solution out there?
Yeah, I think that's an evolving field. We know it's an evolving field. There obviously was a misreading of the electorate in 2022. I think, in the closing weeks, Republicans felt that they were going to have much greater margins, particularly in Congress and some of the congressional races. I think there was kind of a misreading of, the effect of the Dobbs decision on, on the electorate in the closing days, particularly in the suburbs and with independent and moderates, independent women and moderates. And I think that moving forward, pollsters, they are in a period of soul searching right now, and they've got to figure out how to connect with people that, if you're a working mom, do you have time to, sit and answer a 15-minute long survey? You're trying to, put food on the table or afford childcare. And so I think reaching particular segments of the electorate is becoming increasingly difficult. And because of that, we have numbers that aren't as reliable as they were in the past. People aren't sitting at home answering their home phones anymore. How many people even have home phones anymore? This is something that we've got to figure out moving forward. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have more uncertainty on election night than we would like.
Mark, are you laughing because you have a home phone?
I do have a home phone, and I refuse to answer the polls even when they call. But just to tag off of that, those spending decisions made in campaigns have historically, polling has been a really key component. How does that affect the spending side of the campaign?
Yeah, well, it costs more for campaigns to do a statewide poll now. And so that does affect budgeting decisions, particularly when you're trying to put every dollar on TV or digital to move votes. And you don't have a good sense of where to direct those dollars in the closing days because you don't have the reliable numbers that you need. So it does affect we're paying a lot more for polls now than in the past, trying to find reliable data.
Michael, we appreciate you joining us live. It's always good to see you. I do want to bring up Jim Talent, longtime congressman and senator as well. And you knew him very closely. And, of course, I haven't seen him in several years. But, we look back in a very tough race in 2006 that went down to the wire with Claire McCaskill. But I want to go back to a different race with him that was very unusual, and that was the 2000, I want to make sure I have the 2000 gubernatorial race. I was in Jefferson City. Governor Carnahan's plane had crashed. It was just a terrible tragedy. The governor ended up being elected, as you know, posthumously to the Senate, but basically the campaigns all just kind of stopped, and no one really campaigned for the final, let's say, 2 weeks. But in the gubernatorial race, it was Bob Holden, the state treasurer, against Congressman Jim Talent. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know they were very, very close. I mean, had to be within half a percentage point, somewhere in there. If Jim Talent had won that race, and George Bush carried Missouri easily, by the way, the Democrats won everything else, but had Talent won that race, what kind of governor do you think he would have been, and what do you think his priorities would have been? It's an intriguing question to me because he came that close.
Well, I think he would have been a great governor. 100%. I think that, the demographics of Missouri were different then, too.
They were.
Very much more competitive. Obviously, a much more of a battleground state. 2008 would have been the last cycle that Missouri was a battleground on the presidential level. And so you're right. I don't know the exact margin of what Holden won by, but it certainly was close. And yes. I think that Jim Talent would have been a very pragmatic governor. And it's interesting to think about, that era of politicians and whether they could be elected in today's climate and today's party. We've had a rightward shift, obviously, in Missouri, but also at the national level. The party's shifted priorities into much more, populist style philosophy. That's reflected in folks like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, driving a lot of the narrative and conversation. And those politicians from the 2000s weren't necessarily in that mold. And so it is interesting to think about what might have been. The state would have been much better off. Obviously, Bob Holden only served 4 years. And that was a little bit before my time. I was kind of coming of age in that era. So people, institutions, political institutions like yourself, Brian, probably, can recount what the Holden era was like better than I can. But certainly I think the state would have been in a great place. But then if you think about what would that have meant for Matt Blunt's rise?
That's true. That's true. That's a great point.
So yeah, if you think about certain times in Missouri history, that was probably one of them. That certainly with Mel Carnahan dying tragically, but that did reshape things for the next couple election cycles.
No doubt.
We are speaking with Mike Hafner, who is a principal with Spartan Strategic.
Not a whole lot. I can certainly tell you that. I think polling is certainly it's beneficial for the insiders, for the talk radio host and for folks to try to glean movement. Certainly trends in polls are always things to look closely at. Dick Morris is always interesting to listen to. I think that both parties this last cycle had a real messaging crisis. Biden, the progressive left, and of course Republicans are a bit lost in the wilderness too. There's no reason that Kevin McCarthy should be struggling to find the votes for becoming Speaker in January. To answer your question, I think I don't think the general public cares all that much about polling. I think they feel that they've been let down cycle after cycle, dating back to 2016 now, and so to that end, I think candidates are wise to look at trends and try to meet voters where they're at on issues, but that's becoming exceedingly difficult as we've seen in this last election cycle, and it will be moving forward too.
And Mike, the trends in the state, particularly in the suburban areas, don't necessarily bode well for Republicans. I mean, you've got a long record in doing Republican campaigns. What do Republican candidates have to do to kind of reestablish that consistent voting block that the suburbs, particularly St. Louis suburbs, have always been as the anchor for the Republican Party? Suburban areas continue to grow, rural areas continue to lose population. It's a bad long-term trend if we don't figure out a solution.
It is. The 800-pound gorilla in every room, of course, is Donald Trump and how much he'll drive the conversation moving forward. Some of the policies, whether you love or hate Trump, and certainly, let's all acknowledge the guy has a unique ability to defy political gravity. Will that continue on moving forward, and how much will that change the conversation and where we probably need to go to win back some of those voters, particularly independents, and women in the suburbs. If we don't do it, we're going to continue to lose those competitive races, and those are races we should win. I think there's a lot in the Republican Party that those folks, particularly on the free market conservative economic side, that a lot of those pocketbook voters should identify with, should be appealing to those kind of voters, and Republicans need to do a better job of communicating to them. I think some of the culture war issues, certainly they're helpful for Republicans, but there's a number of them too that certainly turn off those voters that we should be appealing to, and we need to just do a better job of communicating to them and meeting those voters where they're at. Certainly, we've got to be respectful to what the base of the Republican Party is now as well.
Certainly, it seems like Republicans have been reactive lately rather than kind of trying to get out front. And I get nervous about, ballot measures or a Dobbs issue or some of these other things. We're staring down the 2023 legislative session. And I don't think like initiative petition reform is a very sexy topic to put on your brochure and go out and talk to voters about, because most people either, aren't playing inside baseball. They just don't care that much. I mean, people want to protect the Constitution, but what issues do you think should be driving the day of the legislative session?
I think legislative leadership in both in both chambers have the right idea. Certainly making it easier for working Missourians to live, work, and provide for their families in this state. Whether that's through tax reform or some of the other policies that make it easier for people to survive in an era of skyrocketing inflation and quite possibly a recession in the coming year. I think there's some other things that are important. IP reform is certainly on the agenda, I think, in both chambers. Not everybody has a voice in that around the state. Right now, as you guys know, you only have to collect signatures to get something on the ballot in 6 of 8 congressional districts, and that kind of marginalizes folks in these areas that may not have the chance to sign a petition to get something on the ballot. And so I think that's important, and I think the legislature has the right priority in providing more freedom to Missourians in that regard. There's some other issues that certainly are going to come up. How are they going to fund expansions of I-70? That's certainly a topic that's been crazy recently, with a lot of ideas being thrown around.
And very popular, I know, here in mid-Missouri. So, thank you so much. We're running a bit short on time. We'll be looking at catching up with you as the 2024 election cycle progresses.
Look forward to it. Thank you, guys.
I should just call myself Branden Rathert because I am so late that I am running over my morning bell, which I am very sad about.
Ran over your own segment.
I know, and I'm getting trolled by Hannah for it. Well, we have been having so much fun talking politics that we haven't even gotten to 2024. And if there was one word, I'm going to 2 words to describe 2024. I think I would call it, on the Republican primary side, a demolition derby. Would you agree with that, folks?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a crazy event.
All right. Well, we've got the governor's race, which we know is going to be complicated. We don't really know much about the lieutenant governor's race.
Except it'll be open.
It'll be open. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. So when we come back at 8:35, we are going to run down each race. Mike Hafner with Spartan Strategic has some candidates in some of those races, some inside knowledge about how those might go, who's shaping up, who's filed, who's said they might file. And so I think we should talk about, we have been doing predictions, and I asked Marc to place a bet earlier on whether sports betting would get through the legislature. I don't know that we will bet on who will win 2024, but we used to talk about how, we're 2 years out, and typically that's a long time in politics, but really it seems like it's speeding up. And so it will be here before we know it. And some of those campaigns have already kicked off.
And we're off to the races. I mean, as soon as the midterm ended, you started seeing the new ones.
So a race by race statewide breakdown coming up at 8:35. All right, this is Stephanie Bell in for Branden Rathert, and you are listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri. I'm joined in studio by Marc Ellinger and Mike Hafner, who already has some connections to races in 2024, and we thought we might just do a quick rundown. We're not doing predictions, we're not placing bets, but I think still, there's only been a few announcements, so just getting a feel and letting people know who we think might be in what race. And how those things are shaking out. So let's start at the top. Governor's race.
Yeah. So there's no shortage of drama in American politics, and there's no shortage of drama in Missouri politics either, as you guys know. Mike Keogh's a longtime friend and client of mine. I'm helping him in the governor's race. Obviously, that race will take up a lot of attention over the next 2 years, and I'm here to tell your audience, listeners, to be prepared for it. This race has just in the last month seen issues of drag queens and what's the other one? Jay Ashcroft banning library books that are deemed inappropriate for children. I would continue to expect that race to gain a lot of attention of voters as we move forward. Both candidates have incredible inherent strengths. Mike Keogh is a retail politician. I think one of the best, certainly the best retail candidate I've ever worked for. The guy doesn't sleep. He's around the state nonstop. And Jay Ashcroft. Jay Ashcroft also obviously has a golden name and wants to continue on his father's legacy of strong public service and very, very well, incredibly well known, obviously, to the state's primary voters. So again, I'm here to tell your listeners to be prepared for.
Well, what
about this is the Super Bowl race of the 2024 cycle.
Bill Eigel came out with a plan for I-70 and hasn't declared he's running for governor, but has hinted that way. So if he gets in the mix, what about him?
Sure. It might pull the electorate a little bit farther to the right. Bill Eigel has built a name for himself. Taken up some of the hard right issues in the legislature and has gotten a pretty significant following around the state because of those positions that he's taken. I think it'll be a challenge for him to raise the money that he needs to be competitive, but we've been surprised before. I think the level of money to compete in this race is going to be in the millions. It will be in the millions. I think the only two candidates that have that fundraising base are Mike Keogh and Jay Ashcroft at this point. But certainly in a multi-way race, Bill Eigel can. It's possible he could carve out a portion of the electorate and be competitive. But at this point, it's hard to see how where he'll raise the money from in order to be competitive at the level he needs to be. I don't really see it at this point, but if you look at the natural progression of where the Republican Party is very strong in the state of Missouri, obviously with this last election cycle, we now control every statewide seat. Talk about a historic time that we're living in. Is it possible that we could be trending towards a state like Kansas at some point where the Republican Party becomes so strong and has so many sometimes often competing elements to it that it opens up an opportunity for Democrats to be more competitive. And I bring that up to say in Kansas, Democrats have been winning statewide races for a while, even one this past cycle. Is it possible Missouri could be that way in a few more election cycles? I wouldn't necessarily rule it out at this point. I think it's something that Republicans need to be aware of, and how do we continue having success at the ballot box and also being able to govern and having a governing coalition in the state. And that's the challenge that I think we'll face more in the coming election cycles. I think Democrats would be wise to start building up a strong base of candidates. I don't really necessarily see that yet, but if they invest resources over the next couple cycles, I wouldn't rule it out them being more competitive in the future in Missouri.
Mike, we appreciate you joining us. Real quick on Bill Eigel, I covered him a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still working on some of the audio as I spread it out, obviously, with the holidays, but he was at Dickey's Barbecue here in town, and he didn't say he's running, but he kind of suggested. I kind of took it he's going to run. That was my impression. But I went back. Mike and I talked in the previous segment about the Holden talent race, and I'm going to get your take on the map and how it's changed. And this was even closer than what Mike and I thought. Bob Holden won that race by 21,000 votes, 1,152,000 votes to Talon's 1,131,000. It was 49.1 to 48.2%, but it was 21,000 votes. But Mike, as you look at that map, and you talked about the changing demographics. The Democrats, as recently as 2000. They carried much of Northeast Missouri. They carried a lot of counties in now ruby red Republican Northwest Missouri. And look at all these Southeast Missouri counties. That is all changed. Every one of those counties now is bright red. What has changed in those rural communities to where Democrats are not competitive? They don't even field candidates in these races anymore at all.
Well, Jay Nixon was governor from 2008 to 2016. Probably one of the last remaining blue dog Democrats in the state. When you look at that map, there obviously has been a significant shift. The rural Democrat, it doesn't exist to the extent that it once did. I think Republicans need to do a better job of competing in the population centers. We lost a number of competitive House seats that I don't think we needed to lose this past election cycle.
Democrats. Springfield's one of them.
Yeah,
the Democrats have 3 seats. That would have been unheard of, Michael, 10 years ago. So the Democrats are picking up some seats down in Greene County.
Yeah, and Republicans will be wise to remember that Democrats only have to compete in 4 counties: Greene, St. Louis, Boone, and Jackson, Kansas City. Republicans need to have margins statewide, and if those margins start to fall, then we're going to lose a lot more competitive races in the suburbs, particularly. But those trends are always recognized. Certainly after elections, and hopefully Republicans can adjust. Who we're talking to and make sure that those gains, that we keep those gains that a lot of people have helped to build over the last 2 decades. Like I said, the natural progression of Republican politics, particularly in Kansas, I think is alarming for us in Missouri. We need to be aware that we've got to continue to meet voters where they're at on issues, and to that end, some of the blow-ups. Caleb Rowden, the state senator from this area, has he has an unenviable position in trying to manage the caucus and some of the personalities that he has in that caucus, and that's a perfect example of where we can drift if we don't watch ourselves, and that there's competing factions that do distract from the message that we should be communicating.
I go back to 1992 when we had all the statewide offices but one. It's very similar where we were at recently. We had a incredibly divisive gubernatorial primary. It was Bill Webster, who was the Attorney General, against Roy Blunt, who was the Secretary of State, and Wendell Bailey, who was the third party. He was the third candidate. He was the state treasurer, a little bit like the spoiler candidate. It was a brutal primary. It got so far down in the dirt. We were so incredibly damaged as a party. We ended up with Mel Carnahan, and then 16 out of 20 years with Democrat governors in a state that we thought had become ruby red. That was back when we still had the base of St. Louis County and we still had the base of Greene County. That's now changed. Is it possible that the 2024 primary, particularly if a guy like Bill Eigel gets in or someone else gets in, could become kind of that divisive thing that maybe opens a door?
Sure. Yeah, possibly. You never know. Look, elections are about contrast and having top tier candidates. I mean, for Democrats to make gains, they got to present voters with an option. I don't see really anybody on the Democratic bench, maybe a Jason Kander, somebody of that stature, unless Claire McCaskill decides to roll back in on a high horse. But, Democrats have to have a have an option to present to voters in order to pick up seats. And right now, I just don't see much of a bench from their side. Not to say that there's not some talented folks, but I think they would be wise to invest more resources in building a legitimate bench out. Hopefully, they don't figure that out. No, I don't think it's a slam dunk, and I've been helping Andrew, General Designee Bailey, I should refer to him as, in the transition phase a little bit. He has a very heavy lift ahead. He's got to build out an entire statewide campaign while transitioning into an office that has a whole lot of challenges right now, and leading the law firm for the state of Missouri. And so I think Andrew starts out, of course, he'll have maybe a perceived advantage of being an incumbent, but he's never been elected to an office. And so I think he recognizes those challenges, and I think there's a lot to like in Andrew. And I think voters are really going to like the story he has to tell, from being a foster parent, a combat veteran, a true constitutional conservative, and somebody that's prosecuted violent criminals, to protect Missourians. And to that end, I think he's got an incredible story. He's got to introduce himself in the right way to Missouri voters. I think the issues and the initiatives of the office that he'll focus on will resonate with Missourians. And we'll see which way Will Scharf decides to go. If he runs for AG, I know he brings a lot of intellect and and his own maybe perceived advantages and ability to maybe fundraise at a big level and have the money to be competitive. We'll see kind of which way all this goes, and I want to rule out some other candidates taking a look at it as well.
So I think a lot of folks maybe were disappointed or were hoping that the governor might have taken the opportunity to appoint a woman in a statewide office. Are there women that, because I don't think any have announced, but do you see the Republican primaries in 2024 including a competitive race and a woman candidate?
I hope so. Certainly there's a number of women in the legislature that, folks like Senator Holly Rader out of Southeast Missouri. Sandy Crawford has always been talked about as a potential appointment of Governor Parsons. Leader of the Senate, Cindy O'Loughlin, could possibly make a run at something. So, I think there's a lot of strong women that I think voters would be wise to take a hard look at in 24. Running a statewide race is a grueling thing, and you have to be mentally prepared for it, and obviously raise the money to be competitive too. And the same thing I would say about Will Scharf looking at this race. The cash only gets you so far. You have to have the message that resonates as well. And for all these candidates that are making the decision and making a jump to the statewide level, they've got to be ready to put everything they have into it for almost 2 years. And that is a big decision to make with their families and themselves too, to get them ready. And you got to find those issues that can drive votes and what you'll run on. And each of these candidates needs to figure out what that is, and if they have a pathway.
Well, and I think we as voters haven't necessarily made up our mind, are we the Trump party? Are we the more right party? Or are we swinging back to something more moderate? And I think, as the voters kind of decide, maybe the candidates evolve on those issues as well. This has been so fascinating. And we're running behind again. But so we would love to have you back sometime as the races progress, as we start to learn more about who's in what race, how those might break down, how the polling is looking or not looking, and whether we should trust it. But we appreciate all of your insights. Again, Mike Hafner with Spartan Strategic. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
All right. Coming up next, we have some leftovers that we didn't get to. and we'll be filling you in on those. You're listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri. This is Stephanie Bell sitting in for Branden Rathert. We are about to wrap up today's show with some leftovers. and not really left over, but we had some big local news as filing closed yesterday at 5. Up here in Columbia, we are not sure whether Representative Basye is actually on the school board ballot. I noticed our news partners, KMIZ, have a list of school board candidate filings, and he's not on the list, but it appears that race will be competitive. And some news, John, in Jefferson City at the close of candidate filing yesterday. So we can say that he will likely be the next Jefferson City mayor, and that's newsworthy only in that race when there hasn't been an incumbent, or when there hasn't been an incumbent, has typically drawn a pretty large field, and so I think it probably speaks to Ron Fitzwater's professionalism and character on the council and his past work, that folks know he would be a strong competitor in that race, and so he gets that office free and clear, it looks like. But He did, and I think that strategy has paid off for him. And I have to wonder, because I do hear, Jefferson City tends to be a more conservative town, and I know from some of those folks, I hear rumblings of how'd we get such a liberal council on some of these issues. Notably, Edie Vogel sued the council over the paver issue, and there are some other issues where the council's been kind of labeled as, more progressive than the community. And so I wonder if these challenges are potentially a result of that. I mean, is that what you're hearing, John? Interesting. So we will continue to give you rundowns of filings as they close and we get the full list. And then tomorrow we will be joined by Southern Boone's new superintendent, Dr. Roth, and we will also have Missouri Times publisher Scott Fawn. Right now, we're looking forward to the Gary Nolan Show.